Vincent Marchetti controlled Chicago with an iron fist. His word was law. His anger was death. When his new maid arrived 3 hours late to his mansion on a freezing November morning, he prepared to deliver the lesson he gave to everyone who disrespected him. But the moment she met his eyes, dirt on her cheek, and apology on her lips, something inside him cracked. What she did next would shatter everything he thought he knew about power. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The grandfather clock in Vincent Marchetti's study struck 6 in the morning with a hollow brass chime that echoed through the limestone halls of his Gold Coast mansion. He stood at the window overlooking Lake Michigan, watching dawn bleed gray and cold across the water. November wind rattled the panes. Chicago sprawled below him. His city, bought with blood and kept with fear. At 42, Vincent had built an empire from the south side to River North, controlling everything from construction contracts to aldermen's votes. His tailored charcoal suit fit him like armor. His dark eyes, sharp as razors, missed nothing. The scar along his jaw, a reminder from his father's world, had long since stopped hurting. Behind him, the study breathed wealth. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, first editions in glass cases. On the wall hung a painting of his grandfather, the original Marchetti, who'd stepped off the boat from Sicily in 1919. Vincent touched the gold watch in his pocket, the old man's watch, passed down, always 3 minutes fast. Time was currency. Lateness was disrespect. Disrespect was death. His phone buzzed. Marco, his second in command. "She's not here yet, boss." Vincent's jaw tightened. "The new girl? Elena Rossi. Supposed to start at 6. It's 9 now. 3 hours late." Vincent felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the cold fury that made grown men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. He'd hired the girl through his usual channels, a cleaning agency that asked no questions, paid in cash, staffed by people who needed to be invisible. His previous housekeeper had retired to Florida with a generous pension, and the understanding that she'd seen nothing, knew nothing. He'd met Elena Rossi once during the interview, a 24-year-old with brown eyes too large for her thin face, wearing a Salvation Army coat and carrying herself with a strange dignity despite the holes in her shoes. She'd looked at him directly, not many people did that, and said she needed the work. He'd liked her honesty. Now she'd made him wait. "When she shows up," Vincent said into the phone, his voice quiet and lethal, "bring her to me." He ended the call and stood motionless at the window. Below, the hired men patrolled the grounds. 6 acres of manicured lawn and iron gates, a fortress disguised as elegance. His wife had left him 5 years ago, taken their daughter to somewhere in California, somewhere he'd agreed not to follow. The divorce papers had cited irreconcilable differences. What they'd meant was, "I can't live with what you are." The mansion, built for a family, now housed only Vincent and his ghosts. He told himself he preferred it this way. Silence was control. At 9:47, the intercom crackled. Marco's voice. "She's here, boss." Vincent waited, counting his own heartbeat. Let her sweat. He moved to his desk, sat in the high-backed chair, folded his hands. The door opened. Marco entered first, a wall of muscle in a black suit, then stepped aside. The girl walked in. Elena Rossi looked worse than she had at the interview. Her dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, damp from snow. Her coat, still that same threadbare blue, hung open over a gray sweater and jeans. But it was her face that caught him. Dirt smudged along her left cheek, exhaustion carved under her eyes, and something else, fresh bruising along her jaw, partially hidden by the angle of her head. She clutched a worn backpack to her chest like a shield. When she saw him, she stopped, and for a moment, Vincent saw fear flicker across her features. But she didn't look away. She met his gaze and held it. "You're 3 hours late," Vincent said, his voice soft as a blade. "I know," she said. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm sorry." "Sorry." He let the word hang between them. "Do you know who I am, Miss Rossi?" "Yes." A swallow. "Mr. Marchetti." "Then you know I don't accept excuses." He rose from his chair, slowly, letting his full height and presence fill the space. "You know that people who waste my time don't get second chances." She nodded. She didn't grovel, didn't cry, just stood there, shoulders squared, waiting for judgment. It annoyed him. It intrigued him. "Tell me why I shouldn't send you back out into the snow and blacklist you from every agency in this city." Elena Rossi took a breath, Because I'm a good worker. Because I need this job. And because... She hesitated, then pushed forward. Because everyone deserves at least one chance to explain. Vincent's eyes narrowed. Explain then. My daughter was sick this morning. High fever. I had to take her to the free clinic on Ashland. They open at 6, but there was a line, and I had to wait 2 hours to see a doctor. She has an ear infection. They gave her antibiotics. My neighbor is watching her now, but I had to make sure she was okay before I left her. I don't have a car. The L was delayed because of ice on the tracks. I ran the last 8 blocks from the station. She paused. That's not an excuse. That's what happened. Vincent studied her. The dirt on her cheek could have been from falling on icy pavement. The bruise on her jaw was older, maybe 3 days. The backpack probably held everything she owned that mattered. She'd said daughter. Single mother then. Struggling. Desperate. Exactly the kind of person his world chewed up and spit out. How old? He asked. Sir? Your daughter. How old? 3. Her name is Lily. 3. The same age his own daughter had been when he'd last held her. Vincent felt something shift beneath his ribs, a pressure he'd learned to ignore. He glanced at Marco, who stood expressionless by the door, waiting for orders. One word, and the girl would be gone. One word, and she'd join the long list of people who'd learned that Vincent Marsetti's mercy had died with his innocence a long time ago. But the watch in his pocket seemed suddenly heavy, his grandfather's watch. The old man, who'd scraped together a life in this city with nothing but will, and a code. You protect your own. You give a man or a woman the chance to prove themselves. After that, what they do is on them. You're hired, Vincent said, but you're on probation. 2 weeks. You're late again. You're gone. You break anything, you're gone. You talk about anything you see in this house, you're gone. Understood? Elena Rossi blinked, surprise breaking through her composure. Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. Prove I didn't make a mistake. He nodded to Marco. Show her the staff quarters. Get her started. As Marco led her toward the door, Elena turned back. Mr. Marsetti? He looked up. I won't let you down. The door closed. Vincent was alone again with the ticking of the grandfather clock. He pulled out the gold watch, opened it. The second hand swept forward. Relentless. 3 minutes fast. Time kept moving whether you wanted it to or not. Outside, snow began to fall harder, covering Chicago in white. He wondered, briefly, what he'd just invited into his fortress. Then he pushed the thought away and returned to his work. But the image of her eyes, steady, unafraid, lingered longer than it should have. 3 days later, Vincent admitted to himself that Elena Rossi was making him rethink every assumption he'd held about people. She worked like someone who understood that survival wasn't guaranteed. Quietly, efficiently, with an attention to detail that bordered on reverent. She cleaned his study without moving a single paper out of place. She learned his schedule without being told. Coffee at 5:45 a.m., black, no sugar. Breakfast at 7 round, light. Lunch sent up on a tray when he was in meetings. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, there when needed, invisible otherwise. She never asked questions. She never lingered. But Vincent found himself noticing her presence in small ways. Fresh flowers in the hallway, windows that gleamed like water, the faint scent of lemon polish that reminded him of his grandmother's house in Cicero a lifetime ago. He told himself it meant nothing. She was good help. That was all. Then came the morning he found her in the kitchen at 5:30 a.m. before anyone else was awake. He'd come down early, restless from another dream about his daughter's 3rd birthday party, the last one before the divorce, before everything crumbled. He'd expected the kitchen to be empty. Instead, he found Elena at the counter, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands. She wore the simple black uniform he'd provided, her hair in that same neat ponytail. She didn't hear him at first, and he watched from the doorway as she worked, her movements practiced, rhythmic, almost meditative. On the counter beside her sat a photograph in a plastic frame, a little girl with dark curls and Elena's eyes, laughing at the camera. "You're here early," Vincent said. Elena jumped, turned, her hand flying to her chest. "Mr. Marchetti, I'm sorry I didn't hear you. I was just..." She gestured at the dough. "I thought I'd make bread, fresh bread, for breakfast. I should have asked first." "It's fine." He moved into the kitchen, poured himself coffee from the pot she'd already brewed. "You bake?" "My grandmother taught me. Back in..." She trailed off. "Back in?" "Taylor Street, Little Italy, before it all got gentrified." A small smile. Long time ago. Vincent leaned against the counter. Taylor Street. The old neighborhood. His father had run numbers out of a social club there in the 70s. You grow up there? Until I was 12. Then we moved to Pilsen. She shaped the dough into a loaf, her hands sure. My grandmother said making bread was about patience. You can't rush it. The dough knows if you're trying to force it. Sounds like your grandmother was a smart woman. She was. Elena set the loaf in a pan, covered it with a cloth. She passed away when I was 15. I'm sorry. She glanced at him, surprised by the condolence. Thank you. They stood in silence for a moment, the kitchen warm and still. Vincent found himself looking at the photograph. Your daughter, he said. How is she? The infection. Better. The antibiotics helped. Elena wiped her hands on a towel. She's with my neighbor during the day. Mrs. Chen. She's been very kind. The father? Vincent didn't know why he asked. It wasn't his business. Elena's face hardened almost imperceptibly. Not in the picture. His loss. She met his eyes, searching for something. Mockery, perhaps, or pity. Finding neither, she nodded slowly. Yes, it is. Vincent drank his coffee, surprised by how easy this conversation felt. He didn't do easy, didn't do personal, but something about the early hour, the smell of rising dough, the soft light through the windows made him feel like he'd stepped outside his own life for a moment, like he was just a man in a kitchen, talking to a woman who knew how to make bread. You have children, Mr. Marchetti? Elena asked, then immediately looked stricken. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. A daughter. The words came out before he could stop them. I don't see her anymore. Elena's expression softened with understanding, not pity. That must be hard. It is what it is. He set down his coffee cup. The bread. How long? An hour to rise, 40 minutes to bake. I'll be in my study. Bring me a slice when it's ready. He left before she could respond, before the conversation could go any deeper. But as he climbed the stairs, he could still smell flour and feel the warmth of the kitchen clinging to him. In his study, surrounded by contracts and ledgers that detailed the mechanics of his empire, Vincent sat at his desk and realized he was looking forward to that bread in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in years. When Elena brought it to him 90 minutes later, warm, sliced, with butter melting into the golden crust, he ate it standing at the window, watching snow fall on the lake. It tasted like memory, like something he'd lost and forgotten he'd been missing. It's good, he told her. Thank you, Mr. Marchetti. After she left, he found himself thinking about her grandmother's words. The dough knows if you're trying to force it. Maybe, Vincent thought, people were the same. Maybe you could only control so much before something fundamental resisted. Maybe that's why his marriage had failed, why his daughter had looked at him with fear instead of love, why he'd spent 2 decades building a fortress that felt more like a tomb. He shook off the thought and returned to work, but the taste of the bread lingered, and with it, the strange, dangerous feeling that something in his carefully controlled world was beginning to shift. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. Elena passed her probation without incident and settled into the rhythms of the mansion with an ease that made Vincent almost forget she hadn't always been there. She learned which floors creaked, which rooms he preferred kept exactly as they were, which mornings he woke from nightmares and needed his coffee stronger. She never asked about the men who came and went at odd hours. Marco with his stone face, Tony from the South Side with his nervous energy, the lawyers in expensive suits who carried briefcases full of documents Vincent never discussed. She cleaned around their meetings, silent as air, and whatever she heard, she kept locked behind her steady brown eyes. Vincent found himself watching for her, not intentionally, or so he told himself, but his awareness had shifted. He noticed when she arrived each morning at 5:30, walking up the long drive because she still didn't have a car. He noticed the way she'd pause sometimes in front of the windows overlooking the garden, her expression distant, like she was seeing something other than snow-covered hedges. He noticed the photograph of her daughter that she kept in her apron pocket now, worn at the edges from handling. December arrived with a vengeance. Chicago locked itself in ice, and Vincent's world grew more complicated. A territory dispute in Bridgeport threatened to turn bloody. The Giordano family from the West Side was pushing into his construction contracts, testing his resolve. His lawyer warned him about a federal investigation into the union pension fund. Nothing concrete yet, but whispers, questions, audits that came too close. Vincent handled it all with the cold efficiency he'd perfected over 20 years. He made the right calls, applied the right pressure, reminded the right people what happened when they forgot who controlled this city. But underneath, he felt the strain, the walls closing in, the weight of maintaining power becoming heavier with each passing year. On a Thursday evening, as sleet hammered against the windows and darkness came early, Vincent was in his study reviewing surveillance photos from the Bridgeport situation when Elena knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he called without looking up. She entered carrying a tray, dinner, which he'd forgotten to request, roasted chicken, vegetables, bread, her bread. She set it on the side table, began to leave. "Wait," Vincent said. He wasn't sure why. Elena turned, hands folded in front of her. "Sir?" He gestured at the second chair in front of his desk. "Sit." Confusion flickered across her face. "Mr. Marsetti, I don't think—" "It wasn't a request." She sat, perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to fly. Vincent leaned back, studying her. She'd been in his house for over a month, and he realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond the surface facts. It bothered him. People were puzzles in his world. You learned their pieces, found their weaknesses, used them or neutralized them. But Elena remained opaque, a cipher who cleaned his house and baked his bread and asked for nothing. "Tell me something," Vincent said. "Why are you really here?" I work here, sir." "That's not what I mean." He tapped the desk. "You're educated. I can tell from the way you talk, the way you move. You could work anywhere. Retail, office job, something with better hours and less—" He searched for the word. "Exposure. Why this? Why work for someone like me?" Elena's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, "May I be honest? I'd prefer it. I work here because no one else will hire me." She met his eyes with that unwavering directness he'd come to recognize. "I have a record, Mr. Marchetti. Misdemeanor assault from 2 years ago. I spent 3 months in Cook County Jail. Most places see that and tear up the application. Your agency doesn't ask questions, so here I am." Vincent felt something click into place. The bruise on her jaw the first morning. The way she'd said the father wasn't in the picture. The fierce protectiveness in her voice when she talked about her daughter. "The assault," he said quietly. "Was it him? The father?" A long pause. "Yes." "What did he do? Does it matter?" "It does to me." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, but Vincent heard the rage beneath it like a seam of molten rock under stone. He put cigarettes out on Lily's arm when she wouldn't stop crying. She was 14 months old. "I came home from my shift at the restaurant and found her screaming, burns on her arm, him drunk on the couch like it was nothing. So She stopped, breathed. "I put him in the hospital. Fractured jaw, broken ribs, concussion. The police arrested me. He pressed charges. I pled guilty because my public defender said I'd do more time if I fought it. I lost my job, lost my apartment. Child services almost took Lily. By the time I got out, he'd disappeared. Haven't seen him since." Vincent absorbed this. He thought of his own daughter. The instinct to protect that transcended reason. What this woman had done. It wasn't criminal. It was justice. Rough, immediate, necessary. The kind of justice his world understood better than any courtroom. "Good," he said. Elena blinked. "What?" "Good. I hope you hurt him badly. I hope he remembers it every time he looks in a mirror." Vincent leaned forward. "You did what you had to do. Don't apologize for it." Something in her expression cracked. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or simply the acknowledgement that she wasn't crazy for feeling what she felt. "Thank you," she whispered. "The record," Vincent said. "I'll take care of it." "You can't." "I can. I will." He picked up his phone, sent a quick text to his lawyer. "By next week, it'll be expunged. You'll be clean." Elena stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve a second chance. Because your daughter deserves a mother who doesn't have to hide." He paused. "Because I can." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stood, smoothed her uniform, composed herself with visible effort. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing." She nodded and moved toward the door, but before she reached it, she turned back. "Mr. Marsetti, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Why do you do it? This life. You're clearly intelligent, capable. You could do anything. Why, this?" Vincent considered the question. It was one he'd stopped asking himself years ago. "Because it's what I know," he said finally. "Because walking away isn't as simple as you think. Because in my world, showing weakness gets you killed." That sounds lonely. It was. God, it was. But Vincent just shrugged. Lonely is safe. Elena looked at him for a long moment, and Vincent had the unnerving sensation that she was seeing past all his carefully constructed armor to something true and fragile underneath. Then she said softly, "I don't think that's as true as you believe." She left before he could respond. Vincent sat alone in his study, the surveillance photos spread out in front of him, and felt the ground of his certainty shift slightly beneath his feet. Outside, the sleet had turned to snow, muffling the city in white silence. He ate the dinner she'd brought him, the chicken tender and perfectly seasoned, and thought about what she'd said. Lonely is safe. He'd built his entire adult life on that principle. But sitting in his empty mansion, in a room full of wealth that meant nothing, Vincent wondered for the first time in years if safety was really enough. The next morning, he found Elena in the kitchen again, making bread. He poured coffee, sat at the counter, and watched her work. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt comfortable, companionable. When the bread was ready, she sliced it, and they ate together. Two people who understood damage, sharing a moment of peace before the day demanded they return to their roles. It became a ritual. Every morning, bread and coffee and silence. Vincent didn't examine it too closely, didn't ask himself why he looked forward to it more than any meeting or deal or victory. But Marco noticed. Vincent saw it in the way his second-in-command watched Elena, calculating, assessing. Saw it in the careful neutrality of Tony's expression when he arrived for a meeting and found Vincent in the kitchen instead of his study. His men were worried. Vincent was breaking his own rules. Never get close, never trust, never let anyone pass the walls. He knew he should stop, knew it was dangerous, but he didn't, because for the first time in years, Vincent Marsetti felt like he was waking up from a long, cold sleep. And the warmth, even if it was temporary, even if it was dangerous, was too compelling to resist. January brought a brittle cold that turned Chicago into a fortress of ice. The lake froze solid, and the wind off the water cut like knives. Vincent's world, never stable, began to fracture in earnest. The Giordano family made their move, a coordinated strike against 3 of his operations in one night. A warehouse in Pilsen burned. 2 of his trucks were hijacked on the Eisenhower. A foreman at a job site in Lakeview was beaten badly enough to send a message. Vincent responded with controlled fury, shutting down 2 Giordano gambling operations and making it clear through back channels that escalation would be met with escalation. But the attack rattled him. It meant someone in his organization had talked. Someone had given the Giordanos enough information to strike precisely where it would hurt. There was a traitor in his house. Vincent spent 3 days locked in his study with Marco in his inner circle, going through personnel files, financial records, phone logs. They narrowed it down to 4 possibilities, then 2. One of them was Tony, young, ambitious Tony from the South Side, who'd been making noise about expanding into territory Vincent considered too risky. The other was a driver named Sal, who'd been with the organization for 15 years, but had gambling debts piling up. Both had means, motive, opportunity. Vincent ordered surveillance on both, told Marco to squeeze their associates, and waited for one of them to make a mistake. Through it all, Elena was there, not intruding, not asking questions, but present in a way that grounded him. She brought him meals when he forgot to eat, made sure his coffee never ran out during the long strategy sessions, cleaned his study at odd hours when the meetings finally broke, and the room smelled like cigar smoke and tension. One night, when he was hunched over his desk at 3 a.m., eyes burning from reading the same financial report for the 10th time, she appeared with chamomile tea and warm bread. "You need to sleep, Mr. Marsetti," she said quietly. "Can't. Not yet." She set the tea down, hesitated, then, "Whatever you're dealing with, it won't get solved by destroying yourself." Vincent looked up at her. Shadows under her eyes told him she wasn't sleeping much either. Her daughter had been sick again, he knew. Another infection. But here she was, worrying about him. "This is my business, Elena. You don't need to. I know." She met his gaze. "But I've seen what stress does to people. My father worked himself to death trying to keep our family afloat. Heart attack at 52. So I'm telling you, rest. Even if it's just an hour. The problems will still be here when you wake up." There was no judgment in her voice, just pragmatic concern. Vincent found himself nodding. "An hour," he agreed. She smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her face, and left. Vincent drank the tea, ate the bread, and allowed himself to lie down on the leather couch in his study. He didn't expect to sleep. but exhaustion pulled him under immediately. When he woke, 3 hours had passed. Someone had covered him with a blanket. Elena, obviously. The study was dark except for a single lamp, and on his desk, she'd left a note in neat handwriting. You slept for 3 hours. Don't be angry. You needed it. E. Vincent folded the note and put it in his pocket next to his grandfather's watch. He went to find her, but she'd already left for the day. So he texted her, the first time he'd used her personal number for anything other than schedule changes. Thank you. Her response came 10 minutes later. You're welcome. Now solve your problems so you can sleep in a bed like a normal human. Despite everything, the betrayal, the war with the Giordanos, the federal investigation circling closer, Vincent smiled. 2 days later, the situation exploded. Sal, the driver, made his move. He tried to run, pulled cash from 3 hidden accounts and bought a ticket to Mexico. Marco's people grabbed him at O'Hare an hour before his flight. They brought him to a warehouse Vincent owned in back of the yards. Industrial, isolated, a place where screams didn't matter. Vincent went alone with Marco, leaving Tony at the mansion with explicit instructions to stay put. If Tony was the other traitor, Vincent wanted him contained. Sal broke quickly, confirmed what Vincent had suspected. He'd been feeding information to the Giordanos for 6 months, paid enough to clear his debts, and then some. But he swore he was the only one. Swore Tony wasn't involved. Swore he'd acted alone out of desperation and stupidity. Vincent listened, asked questions, verified details. Then he made the decision he'd made 100 times before in 20 years, the decision that kept his empire intact, and his reputation intact, and his hands soaked in blood. He nodded to Marco, turned and walked out of the warehouse, heard the single gunshot as he reached his car, felt nothing. This was the job. This was survival. You eliminated threats. You protected your own. You didn't hesitate. But driving back to the Gold Coast through snow-covered streets, Vincent felt the weight of it settle over him like a shroud. He thought of Elena's words. Why do you do it? This life. And for the first time, he didn't have an answer that satisfied him. Because it's what I know. That was just an excuse. Because walking away gets you killed. That was fear. The truth, the one he'd been avoiding, was simpler and more damning. He did this because he'd never figured out how to be anything else. He arrived home after midnight. The mansion was dark, except for a light in the kitchen. He should have gone straight to his study, poured himself a drink, buried the night's events and work. Instead, he found himself walking toward the light. Elena was at the counter, making bread again. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her set down the dough and cross to him without a word. She didn't ask what had happened, didn't offer platitudes, just stood there, present, solid, real. I killed a man tonight, Vincent heard himself say. The words came out flat, factual. He betrayed me, so I had him killed. Elena didn't flinch. I'm sorry. Are you? I'm sorry you had to do it. I'm sorry you live in a world where that's the solution. She paused. But I'm not sorry he's dead. If he betrayed you, if he put you in danger, then he made his choice. Vincent stared at her. She should be horrified, should be running. Instead, she looked at him with clear eyes that held neither judgment nor fear, just a deep understanding of how the world worked when you were fighting to survive. You scare me sometimes, he said quietly. Why? Because you see me, the real me, and you haven't run yet. Elena reached out, and for a moment Vincent thought she might touch him. His hand, his arm, something. But she stopped just short, her hand hovering in the space between them. Maybe, she said softly, I'm not looking for a reason to run. Maybe I'm looking for a reason to stay. The air in the kitchen felt charged, dangerous. Vincent knew he should step back, reestablish the boundaries, remember who he was and what she was. But he couldn't move, couldn't look away. Elena, I should finish the bread, she said quickly, breaking the moment. She returned to the counter, hands moving through the familiar motions. It's late. You should sleep. Vincent nodded, even though sleep felt impossible. Thank you, he said. For what? He wasn't sure. For not running. For seeing him. For existing in his life like an anchor when everything else was chaos. He went upstairs, but he didn't sleep. He sat in his study with the lights off, looking out at the frozen lake and the city beyond, and felt the ground shift beneath him again. Sal's betrayal was handled. The Giordanos would think twice before striking again. The immediate crisis was contained, but a new crisis had emerged, one Vincent had no protocol for. He was falling for his housekeeper, A woman with a daughter and a record and a fierce, quiet strength that made him want things he'd given up on years ago. Connection, trust, the possibility that lonely wasn't the only option. It was the most dangerous position he'd ever been in, because in his world, caring about someone made them a target, made them leverage, made them a weapon someone else could use against you. Vincent had learned that lesson with his ex-wife, with his daughter, had sworn never to make that mistake again. But as dawn broke over Chicago, and Elena's light in the kitchen finally went dark, Vincent Marchetti admitted to himself that it was already too late. The mistake was made. The only question now was what he would do about it. The federal investigation crystallized into something real on a gray February morning when Vincent's lawyer called with news that made his blood run cold. They had wiretaps. 3 months of recorded conversations, enough to build a RICO case that could put Vincent and half his organization away for decades. The lawyer said it wasn't imminent. The prosecutors were still building their case, gathering corroborating evidence, but it was coming. 6 months, maybe a year. Vincent had time to prepare, to insulate himself, to potentially cut a deal. But the walls were closing in. Vincent spent the next week in damage control mode. He moved money through offshore accounts, destroyed documents, had conversations with his lawyers about cooperation agreements and witness protection. The words felt surreal. After 20 years of being untouchable, of controlling everything, he was facing the possibility of losing it all. Prison, disgrace, the empire he'd built crumbling into dust. At night, alone in his study, Vincent pulled out his grandfather's gold watch and held it like a talisman. 3 minutes fast, time running out. He didn't tell Elena any of this, kept their morning ritual, bread, coffee, silence, intact because it was the only part of his day that felt real anymore. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he stared out windows like he was memorizing the view, the careful neutrality that had replaced his usual sharp focus. One morning, she set down the bread and said, "Talk to me." Vincent looked at her across the counter. She wore her black uniform, her hair pulled back, her eyes serious and kind. He wanted to tell her everything, wanted to unburden himself to someone who might understand. But how could he drag her into this? She was clean now. His lawyer had expunged her record as promised. She had a daughter to protect. The last thing she needed was to be associated with a man facing federal charges. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said. "Mr. Marchetti, Vincent." The name came out rougher than he intended. "Just call me Vincent." Surprise flickered across her face. "Vincent," she said, testing it. "What's happening?" "Legal problems. Federal investigation. It's complicated." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I might lose everything." He laughed, but it came out hollow. "Ironic, isn't it? I spent 20 years building this empire, eliminating threats, staying 10 steps ahead, and in the end, it's going to be accountants and wiretaps that bring me down." Elena moved around the counter, closing the distance between them. She didn't touch him, but her presence felt like warmth in the cold morning. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. My lawyer is working on options. But the truth is..." Vincent stopped, the words catching in his throat. "The truth is I'm tired, Elena. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of being the man everyone fears. Tired of living in a fortress that feels like a prison. Then stop." He stared at her. "What?" "Stop. Walk away. You have money, resources. Take what you can and disappear. Start over somewhere else. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because people depend on me. Because walking away means leaving my people vulnerable to the Giordanos, to the feds, to every enemy I've made. Because," he struggled for the real reason, "because I don't know how to be anyone other than this." Elena reached out and did what she'd stopped herself from doing weeks before. She took his hand. Her palm was warm, calloused from work, steady. "You're more than this," she said quietly. "I've seen it. In the way you check on Lily when she's sick, even though you've never met her. In the way you cleared my record without asking for anything in return. In the small kindnesses you think no one notices. You're not just the man everyone fears, Vincent. You're also the man who eats bread in the kitchen at dawn and talks to me like I'm a person, not just the help." Vincent looked down at their joined hands, feeling something crack open in his chest. "If I walk away, I put you in danger. Anyone associated with me becomes a target. Then we leave together." The words hung in the air, impossible and tempting. Vincent searched her face for doubt, for fear, for any sign she didn't mean it. He found none. You don't know what you're saying. You have Lily to think about. I am thinking about her. I'm thinking that I want her to grow up seeing her mother with someone who treats her with respect. I'm thinking that the life I'm building here, in this city, is small and hard and full of ghosts. I'm thinking—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm thinking that for the first time in years, I see a possibility of something better, and it scares me, but not as much as the idea of letting it go without even trying." Vincent felt his carefully constructed defenses shatter completely. This woman, this fierce, damaged, brave woman, was offering him something he'd thought was lost forever, a chance at redemption, a second life, not built on fear and blood, but on something fragile and real. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, "I've done terrible things. You know that. You've seen enough to understand what I am." "I know what you've been," she corrected. "That doesn't mean it's what you have to stay." Before Vincent could respond, his phone rang. Marco's name flashed on the screen. He considered ignoring it, but years of discipline won out. He released Elena's hand, immediately missing its warmth, and answered. "What is it?" Marco's voice was tight, urgent. "Boss, we have a problem. Tony's missing. He didn't check in this morning, and his apartment is cleared out. Looks like he ran." Vincent's blood went cold. "When?" "Sometime last night. And boss, he took files with him. Personnel records, financial documents. If he's flipped, find him." Vincent's voice turned to steel. "Pull everyone. Check the airports, bus stations, his family. Find him before the feds do." He hung up and stood frozen, the implications crashing over him. Tony hadn't been involved in Sal's betrayal, but he'd clearly been planning his own exit, and if he'd taken files to trade for immunity, Elena's name would be in there. Her employment records, background check, everything. The feds would come asking questions, would dig into her past, would potentially use her to get to Vincent. By trying to protect her, by having his lawyer clear her record, Vincent had created a trail that led directly from him to her, and now that trail was about to become evidence. "What is it?" Elena asked, reading his expression. Vincent looked at her, this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world in 4 months, and felt everything he'd built, not the empire, but this fragile, unexpected connection, start to crumble. "I have to go," he said. "Stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone except Marco. Don't talk to anyone. I'll explain everything when I get back." "Vincent!" But he was already moving, grabbing his coat, his phone, his keys. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he'd see the hurt and confusion in her eyes, and it would break him completely. He'd brought this danger to her doorstep. He'd been selfish, letting her get close, pretending there could be a different ending. The truth his grandfather never taught him. Some mistakes can't be fixed. Some damage can't be undone. Vincent drove through the frozen city, following Marco's coordinates to a motel in Cicero, where they'd tracked Tony's phone. By the time he arrived, it was over. Tony was in the wind, the motel room empty except for a burner phone and a note that said simply, "I'm sorry. It's the only way out." Marco stood in the doorway, his face grim. "He's talking to the feds, boss. Has to be." Vincent stared at the empty room and felt the last pillar of his empire crack. Tony had been with him for 8 years, had eaten at his table, had sworn loyalty, and now he was gone, trading everything Vincent had built for his own survival. The irony wasn't lost on Vincent. He'd been considering the exact same move, walking away, starting over. The only difference was Elena, the idea that he wouldn't have to do it alone. But that dream was ashes now, because the moment the feds came knocking, the moment they started connecting Elena to his organization, her life would be destroyed. Her daughter would be at risk. Everything she'd fought to build would crumble. Vincent couldn't let that happen. He turned to Marco. "Get a message to my lawyer. Tell him to start cooperation negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'll give them what they want. Names, records, everything. But I need guarantees. Elena Rossi and her daughter get full immunity and protection. New identities, relocation, clean slate. Non-negotiable." Marco's eyes widened. "Boss, if you cooperate, you're looking at witness protection yourself. You'd have to leave everything. I know what it means." Vincent's voice was flat, final. "Just do it." He drove back to the mansion as dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold. The city looked beautiful from the highway, sprawling and indifferent, eating people's dreams and spitting out survivors. Vincent had been a survivor his whole life. had clawed his way up from nothing, built an empire on will and ruthlessness, and now he was going to tear it all down to save one person. The strangest part was that he didn't regret it. When he walked into the kitchen, Elena was there, waiting. She'd been there all night, he realized, seeing the exhaustion in her face. "Tell me," she said. So he did. Told her about Tony, about the cooperation deal he was negotiating, about the fact that her name was in files that would become evidence. Told her that he was going to protect her, no matter what it cost him. When he finished, Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You can't do this. It's already done. Vincent, if you cooperate with the feds, you'll go to prison. Even with a deal, you're looking at years, 5 to 7 with good behavior. Maybe less." He tried to smile. "I've survived worse." "No." Elena's voice was fierce. "No, you don't get to sacrifice yourself for me. I didn't ask for that. I don't want that. What you want doesn't change what's necessary." Vincent reached out, cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was soft, warm, alive. "Listen to me. I've spent 20 years taking from this city, taking power, taking lives, taking whatever I wanted. For once, I get to give something back. I get to make a choice that isn't about empire or survival or fear. I get to protect someone who deserves it." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing me. You're getting your life back. You and Lily will be safe, set up somewhere far from here. You'll have money, new identities, a real chance. Without you, without me." The words hurt more than Vincent expected, but alive, free. That's what matters. Elena pulled away from his touch, wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "This isn't fair." "No," Vincent agreed. "It's not, but it's the only move I have left." Outside, the sun had fully risen, cold and bright. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Deal in motion. Immunity papers drafted. Need your signature. Time's up." Vincent looked at Elena, memorizing her face, the brown eyes that had seen him completely, the strength in her jaw, the way she stood like she could carry the world if she had to. He wanted to kiss her, wanted to hold her, wanted to pretend there was still time for different choices. Instead, he said, "I need you to leave. Today. Marco will take you and Lily to a safe house until the paperwork is finalized. Don't contact me. Don't come back here. Just go. Live. Be happy. Vincent, please." The word came out broken. "Please, Elena. Let me do this one good thing." She looked at him for a long, devastating moment. Then she nodded, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. Vincent stood alone in the space where they'd shared bread and coffee, and the beginning of something that might have been love, and felt the full weight of what he was losing settle over him like a grave. The grandfather clock in the study chimed. 3 minutes fast. Time running out. Vincent Marchetti had finally run out of time. The next 72 hours moved with the mechanical efficiency of an execution. Vincent met with his lawyers in a conference room downtown, signed documents that would dismantle everything he'd built, and provided the U.S. Attorney's Office with detailed testimony about 20 years of operations, names, dates, locations, the whole architecture of his empire, laid bare. In exchange, reduced sentence, protective custody, and ironclad immunity for Elena Rossi and her daughter. The prosecutors agreed. They were getting the bigger fish, connections to the Giordano's, corrupt officials, money laundering networks that stretched to 3 states. Vincent was just the key that unlocked the door. Marco took Elena and Lily to a safe house in Evanston, a bland apartment that could have been anywhere. Vincent didn't go with them, didn't say goodbye. Clean breaks were less painful, he told himself, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. He sent one text to Elena the night before his arrest was scheduled. "You and Lily are protected. Live well." That's all he let himself say. Her response came an hour later. "This isn't over." Vincent didn't reply, because it was over. In the morning, federal agents would arrive at the mansion with cameras and warrants, and Vincent would surrender peacefully, wearing the same charcoal suit he'd worn the day Elena first walked into his study 3 hours late. The irony was perfect, his story with her beginning and ending with the measurement of time. But at 3 a.m., with 5 hours left before the arrest, Vincent sat in his study one last time and realized there was a final move to make. The Giordano's. They'd been circling his territory for months, waiting for weakness. The moment Vincent was in custody, they'd strike, take his operations, absorb his people, consolidate power. Some of his crew would fight, some would die, and the violence would ripple outward, touching everyone connected to his organization, including the records that mentioned Elena. The immunity deal protected her legally, but it didn't protect her physically. If the Giordanos found out about her connection to Vincent, if they decided to use her as leverage or revenge, the federal protection would be meaningless. She'd spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. So would Lily. Vincent couldn't allow that. He made a call, not to Marco or his lawyers, but to someone outside the organization, a journalist named Kate Murphy from the Tribune, who'd been investigating organized crime in Chicago for a decade. Vincent had avoided her carefully over the years, never giving her anything she could use. Now he gave her everything. "Ms. Murphy," he said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "This is Vincent Marchetti. I have a story for you, but you need to publish it in the next 4 hours." Silence. Then, "I'm listening." Vincent laid it out. The Giordano operations, their leadership structure, their illegal gambling network, their plans to expand into territories Vincent was about to vacate. He gave her names, addresses, financial records he'd been collecting for years as insurance, enough to trigger multiple investigations, enough to keep the Giordanos busy defending themselves instead of attacking. He didn't mention his own cooperation deal. That would come out soon enough. But he made sure the story would hit before his arrest became public. "Why are you doing this?" Kate asked when he finished. "Because I'm trying to leave the world slightly less terrible than I found it," Vincent said. "And because there are people who deserve to live without fear. People like your housekeeper." Vincent's hand tightened on the phone. "What?" "I've been watching your house for months, Mr. Marchetti. I've seen her come and go. Seen the way you look at her through the windows." Kate's voice was sharp, knowing. "If this is about protecting her, you should know the Giordanos already have her on their radar. They've been surveilling your property for weeks." Vincent's blood turned to ice. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been surveilling them." Papers rustled. "They have photos, Mr. Marchetti. Of her, her daughter, the neighbor who watches the kid. Their insurance in case they need leverage against you. If you disappear into federal custody without neutralizing them first, she's exposed." Vincent stood, his mind racing. The immunity deal wasn't enough. The story wasn't enough. He needed to eliminate the threat completely, and he was running out of time. "Where are the photos?" "Giordano's main office in Little Italy, above the restaurant on Taylor Street." Vincent knew the place. Fortified, guarded, impossible to breach without starting a war. And he had 4 hours before federal agents arrived to take him into custody. It was insane. Suicidal. Exactly the kind of move he'd spent 20 years being too smart to make. He called Marco. "Boss." Marco answered immediately. "Everything okay?" "No. I need you to assemble a team. Small, reliable, people who trust me more than they fear the consequences. Meet me at the warehouse in back of the yards in 30 minutes. "Boss, what are we doing?" "Something stupid," Vincent said. "Something necessary." He hung up and moved through the mansion one last time, not gathering possessions. He was leaving all of that behind, but saying a silent goodbye to the fortress that had been his life. In the study, he picked up the photograph of his grandfather, the original Marchetti. "You protect your own, even when it costs you everything." "I'm trying, old man," Vincent said quietly. He left the photograph on the desk and walked out. The warehouse was freezing, lit by harsh fluorescence that cast everything in sharp relief. Marco arrived with 4 men. Tony, before he'd fled, would have made 5, but these were solid, loyal. Vincent laid out the plan. Hit the Giordano office, retrieve the surveillance files, get out. It would be loud, messy, dangerous, the kind of operation that would add years to his eventual sentence if he was caught. But if he succeeded, Elena would be safe, truly safe. "This is for a woman?" one of the men asked. Not judgmental, just clarifying. "This is for making sure my cooperation doesn't get anyone innocent killed," Vincent corrected. But Marco gave him a look that said he knew the truth. They moved at 4 a.m., 3 vehicles, coordinated timing. The restaurant on Taylor Street was dark, but Vincent knew there'd be guards in the apartments above. He'd done enough of these operations to understand the rhythm. Fast, brutal, overwhelming force, before anyone could respond. They breached the rear entrance, neutralized 2 guards with suppressed weapons, and moved upstairs. Vincent led, Marco at his back, the team fanning out. They found the office on the 3rd floor, a cramped space full of filing cabinets and a desktop computer. Vincent located the surveillance files in minutes. Folders marked with his address, filled with photos of Elena, Lily, the neighbor, the routes Elena walked, the school Lily would eventually attend. His vision went red. These weren't just insurance. They were targeting plans. "Burn it all," Vincent ordered. "Computer, files, everything." While his team worked, Vincent heard footsteps on the stairs, reinforcements arriving. He moved to the door, weapon raised, and fired twice. Return fire shattered the doorframe. Marco dragged him back, and the room erupted into chaos. Bullets, smoke, shouting. Vincent felt time slow down, each second crystalline and sharp. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was war. They fought their way out, leaving 3 of Giordano's men down and the office in flames. Vincent took a bullet to the shoulder, but adrenaline kept him moving. They piled into the vehicles and scattered, protocol for this kind of heat. Vincent ended up in Marco's car, bleeding into the seat, Chicago's streets blurring past the windows. "Hospital?" Marco asked. "No. Safe house in Evanston." Vincent pressed his hand to the wound, feeling hot blood seep through his fingers. "I need to see her." "Boss, just drive." They arrived at the bland apartment building as dawn broke. Marco helped Vincent up the stairs. His shoulder was screaming now, the adrenaline fading, and knocked on the door. Elena answered, her face going pale when she saw the blood. "Oh my God." "Vincent, I'm fine." He pushed past her into the apartment, leaving red prints on the doorframe. "Where's Lily?" "Asleep in the bedroom." "Vincent, what happened?" He turned to face her, swaying slightly. The apartment was small, generic, nothing like the mansion. But Elena was here, and that made it real. The Giordanos had files on you. Photos, plans. I destroyed them. You're safe now. Truly safe. Elena stared at him, then at Marco, who nodded confirmation. "You attacked them?" "Vincent, you were supposed to surrender in..." She checked the clock. 2 hours. The feds are going to think you ran. Let them think that. Vincent felt his legs give out, sat heavily on the couch. "I'll turn myself in at the federal building instead of the mansion. It doesn't change the deal. But I needed to make sure..." He looked at her. "I needed to make sure you'd be okay." Elena knelt in front of him, her hands shaking as she examined the wound. "You're bleeding everywhere. We need to get you to a hospital." "After..." Vincent reached out, cupped her face with his good hand. "Listen to me. The immunity deal is solid. You and Lily will be relocated, given new identities. You'll have money, protection, everything you need. But you have to promise me you'll take it. You'll go somewhere far from here and build a real life. I promise," Elena whispered. "If you promise me something too." "What?" "Survive this. Do your time. And when you get out, find me." Vincent felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. "Elena, find me," she repeated fiercely. "I don't care how long it takes. 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. When you're free, you find me. Because this, us, it's not over. I won't let it be over." Vincent pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and kissed her. It was desperate, tasting like blood and salt, and goodbye and promise all at once. When they broke apart, Elena was crying, but her eyes were determined. "Okay," Vincent said. "I'll find you." Marco cleared his throat. "Boss, we need to go. You need medical attention. And then we need to get you to the federal building before they issue a warrant." Vincent nodded. He stood, Elena supporting him, and took one last look at the apartment. Through the bedroom door, he could see a small form under blankets. Lily, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her mother's protector had just burned down half his life to keep her safe. "Take care of them," Vincent told Marco. "Always, boss." Vincent walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the gray Chicago morning. His shoulder throbbed. His future was measured in prison years and uncertainty. But for the first time since his grandfather died, Vincent Marchetti felt like he'd done something that mattered. Something clean and true. He'd protected someone he loved, and she'd promised to wait. That was enough. 6 years later. Vincent Marchetti walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana, on a Tuesday morning in April. The sun was bright, the air smelled like cut grass and freedom, and he was 48 years old with nothing to his name except the clothes on his back and an address memorized from a letter Elena had smuggled to him through his lawyer 18 months ago. Spokane, Washington, a city on the other side of the country, far from Chicago's ice and ghosts. The letter had been brief, just an address and 3 words. We're still waiting. Vincent had served his full sentence, turned down early release because it would have meant more restrictions, more monitoring. He'd wanted to be completely free when he found her. 6 years in prison had been exactly what she'd said it would be. Hard, lonely, transformative. He'd taken classes, earned a degree in business management that made the other inmates laugh because what did a former mob boss need with legitimate credentials? He'd read every book in the prison library, some of them twice. He'd learned patience in a way he'd never understood in his old life, and he'd thought about Elena every single day. The promise they'd made in that apartment had sustained him through fights, lockdowns, the grinding monotony of incarceration. He'd thought about her making bread, about her daughter's laugh that he'd never heard, about the possibility of a life built on something other than fear. And now, standing in the Indiana sunshine with a bus ticket in his pocket, that possibility was real. The bus ride took 36 hours. Vincent watched America scroll past the windows. Farmland, mountains, small towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by time. He'd spent his entire adult life in Chicago, controlling a few square miles like they were the whole world. Now he was nobody, going nowhere, with nothing. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt lighter than he had in decades. Spokane appeared on the horizon at dusk, the city lights scattered across the valley like thrown stars. Vincent got off the bus downtown, oriented himself with a gas station map, and started walking. The address was in a neighborhood called South Hill, residential, tree-lined, quiet, nothing like the Gold Coast mansion or the gritty Chicago streets of his past. He found the house as the last light was fading from the sky, a small craftsman bungalow painted blue, with a porch in a yard and a swing hanging from an oak tree. Vincent stood on the sidewalk, suddenly paralyzed. 6 years. People changed in 6 years. Children grew up. Maybe Elena had moved on, met someone else, decided that waiting for a former mob boss was a fantasy not worth holding. Maybe the letter had been kindness, a way to give him hope without expecting him to actually show up. Maybe the front door opened. Elena stepped out onto the porch, and Vincent's thoughts stopped completely. She looked different. Her hair was longer, loose around her shoulders. She wore jeans and a sweater that looked comfortable, lived in. She was fuller, healthier, no longer carrying the sharp edges of survival. But her eyes, those steady brown eyes, were exactly the same. She saw him on the sidewalk and went completely still. Vincent, he couldn't speak, could only nod. Elena came down the porch steps slowly, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she moved too fast. When she reached the sidewalk, she stopped an arm's length away, searching his face. Vincent knew what she was seeing. Gray in his hair, lines around his eyes, 6 years of prison worn into his features. He was older, harder, marked by time, but he was here. He'd kept his promise. "You found me," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I found you." She closed the distance and wrapped her arms around him. Vincent held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. They stood like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on. Finally, Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I made a promise." "I know, but..." She laughed, the sound watery and relieved. 6 years is a long time. I thought maybe you'd get out and decide you wanted something different. Someone different." Vincent cupped her face, the gesture familiar from that last morning in the Evanston apartment. "There's no one different. There's only you." Elena kissed him then, soft and careful and full of 6 years of waiting. When they broke apart, she took his hand. "Come inside. There's someone who wants to meet you." Vincent let her lead him up the porch steps, through the door, into a house that smelled like vanilla and coffee. The interior was warm, cluttered with lived-in comfort, books on shelves, photographs on walls, a child's drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets. In the living room, a girl sat on the couch reading. She looked up when they entered, and Vincent saw Elena in her features, the same brown eyes, the same determined jaw, but she was older than he'd imagined. 9 now, not 3, a person, not a toddler. "Lily," Elena said, "this is Vincent, the friend I've told you about." Lily set down her book and studied him with an intensity that was unnerving. "Mom's told me a lot about you," she said finally. "She said you were brave." Vincent glanced at Elena, who smiled encouragingly. "Your mom's the brave one," he said. "I just tried to do the right thing. She said you protected us when bad people wanted to hurt us, that you went to jail so we could be safe. Lily stood, crossed to him, and extended her hand. Thank you. Vincent shook her hand, feeling something tight in his chest loosen. You're welcome. They sat, Vincent on the couch, Elena beside him, Lily curled in the armchair, and talked. Elena explained how the witness protection program had worked. New identities, relocation assistance, enough money to start over. She'd chosen Spokane because it was far from Chicago but still felt like a real city. She'd enrolled Lily in a good school, found work as a baker at a local cafe, built a quiet life. She'd made friends, joined a community, became someone other than a woman running from her past. It's been good, Elena said, but it's been incomplete. We've been waiting for you. Vincent looked around the house, this small, warm space that was nothing like the cold fortress he'd once inhabited, and felt the last piece of his old identity fall away. He wasn't Vincent Marchetti, Chicago mob boss anymore. He was just Vincent, a man with a criminal record and a second chance, and a woman who'd waited 6 years for him to come home. What happens now? He asked. Now, Elena said. We figure it out together. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful. Vincent found work at a construction company. Honest labor, cash wages, no questions asked about his past. He rented a small apartment 2 blocks from Elena's house because moving in immediately felt too fast, too presumptive. But he spent every evening at the Blue Bungalow, helping with dinner, listening to Lily talk about school, sitting on the porch with Elena as the sun set over Spokane. They moved slowly, carefully, learning each other outside the crisis that had defined them. Vincent learned that Elena was funnier than he'd known, quick with dry observations that made him laugh, that she sang off-key while baking and cried at movies, and had strong opinions about everything from politics to pizza toppings. He learned that Lily was brilliant, reading at a level years ahead of her age, and that she'd inherited her mother's fierce protectiveness. She grilled Vincent constantly about his intentions, making sure he wasn't going to hurt her mom. He learned what it meant to live without looking over his shoulder, without calculating threats, without carrying the weight of an empire. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, and the best. 3 months after his arrival, Vincent and Elena were sitting on the porch swing, watching fireflies drift through the yard. Lily was inside, asleep. The night was warm, quiet, perfect. I've been thinking, Elena said. About us, about what we're building. She turned to face him. I love you, Vincent. I've loved you since that morning in the kitchen when you told me everyone deserved a chance to explain. Maybe before that, and I think you love me too. I do. The words came easily, honestly, more than I knew I could love anyone. Then I have a question. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. She opened it, revealing a simple gold band. I know this is backwards. I know traditionally the man asks, but I'm not traditional, and neither are you. So, Vincent Marchetti, will you marry me? Vincent stared at the ring, then at her, and felt his entire world narrow to this moment. A woman who'd waited 6 years, a life built on second chances, a future that had seemed impossible from a prison cell in Indiana. Yes, he said. God, yes. Elena slipped the ring onto his finger, and they kissed in the summer darkness, the swing creaking beneath them. Inside the house, Vincent could see the photographs Elena had hung on the walls, images of her and Lily, memories of the life they'd built. Soon, he'd be in those photographs, part of the story, not as the dangerous man from her past, but as the person who'd chosen to become something better. They married in September, in a small ceremony at a park overlooking the Spokane River. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a yellow dress and a serious expression as she scattered petals down the aisle. Elena wore white, simple, elegant, perfect. Vincent wore a suit he'd bought from a thrift store, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. I promise to protect you, he said, not by building walls or eliminating threats, but by being present, by choosing you every day, by being the man you saw in me before I saw him in myself. Elena's vows were equally simple. I promise to stand with you, to remind you who you are when you forget, to build a life with you that's big enough for all of us, past, present, and future. When the officiant pronounced them married, Vincent kissed his wife and heard Lily cheer, and felt for the first time in his entire adult life that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Years passed. Vincent and Elena bought a house together, bigger than the Blue Bungalow, with room for Lily, and eventually, maybe, more children. Vincent started his own construction business, hired men with records like his, gave them the second chances the world rarely offered. Elena opened a bakery downtown, the kind of place that became a neighborhood fixture, where people gathered for bread and coffee and conversation. Lily grew into a fierce, brilliant teenager who wanted to be a lawyer, who said she wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. On Sunday mornings, Vincent would make coffee, and Elena would bake bread, and they'd sit together in the kitchen exactly like they'd done in the Gold Coast mansion a lifetime ago. But now there was no fear, no empire to protect, no walls between them. Just two people who'd survived their separate disasters and found, against all odds, a way to heal together. Vincent kept his grandfather's watch in a drawer, but he rarely checked it anymore. Time wasn't something to be controlled or feared. It was just the medium through which they lived, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always moving forward. One evening, 15 years after Vincent had walked out of prison, he and Elena sat on their porch watching the sun set over Spokane. Lily was away at college. The house was quiet. Elena's hand rested in his, comfortable and familiar. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Everything you gave up?" Vincent thought about the empire he'd built and burned, the power he'd wielded, the fear he'd commanded. Then he thought about this, the woman beside him, the daughter they'd raised together, the business he'd built with honest work, the peace that came with sleep that wasn't haunted. "No," he said, "not for a second." Elena smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I don't either." They sat in silence as the light faded and the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed, not his grandfather's watch with its built-in urgency, but a simple wall clock that marked time without judgment. Vincent listened to it and felt grateful for every second he'd been given to become someone better. The maid had showed up 3 hours late, and that one act of defiance, that one moment of desperation and courage, had changed everything. Had given Vincent Marchetti a chance to learn that power wasn't control, that strength wasn't violence, that the most revolutionary act of his life would be choosing love over fear. He'd been a king in Chicago. He was just a man in Spokane, and he'd never been happier. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us what you thought about Vincent and Elena's journey. Your support means everything to us, and we'd love to hear which part of their story resonated with you the most.